Welcome, colleagues and professionals in project management. Today, we are going to take a look at questions from the risk area in preparation for your PMP exam. Let's jump straight into the first set of questions. Your company is going through an agile transformation. The Agile PMO has decided to carry out research to deduce if your firm is well suited for agile. Which of the following resources would you use to do this? Is it A, suitability assessment radar chart? Is it B, probability and impacts matrix chart? C, risk breakdown structure chart? Or D, continuum of life cycles chart? Do hit the pause button if you need more time. Now, using the process of elimination, it says, going through an agile transformation. How do you know if your firm is well suited for agile? This is very specific. So using the process of elimination, there are some things that don't help us know if a firm is well suited for agile. It would not be the continuum of life cycles chart. This looks at project suitability generally, but it's not the best answer either. C, risk breakdown structure chart, is not a good fit to help know if your firm is suited for agile. Probability and impacts matrix is helpful when computing a risk score, so it's not that. The best answer is A. It's the suitability assessment radar chart. This is talked about in the Agile Practice Guide. Agile Practice Guide, and the page is 126. Let me see if I can help you recall this chart. Remember the radar chart that looks like a spider web, and it's got three main categories. It's got culture, it's got team, and it's got project, and there are ratings to see if the culture is suitable, if the team is the ideal size, and if the project has high rates of change. So take a look at page 126 in the Agile Practice Guide for context. Next question. Teams use stand-ups to micro-commit to each other, uncover problems, and ensure the work flows smoothly through the team. What is a question that you could ask at the daily scrum? Is it, what did I complete since the last release? Is it what I'm planning to complete between now and the next release? Is it C, what are my risks or problems? Or is it D, what am I planning to complete before the next sprint? I'll give you some time to think about it. All right, let's take a look at the answer. So the three questions in the world of Scrum are, what did I do yesterday to move us towards the goal? What will I do today to move us towards the goal? And are there any impediments? So which of these fits the bill? It's not about releases, so that immediately disqualifies A and B. You see the word release, you got to be careful with that. And the final one, what am I planning to complete before the next sprint? That doesn't make sense. That is not what the question is. The only one that syncs best is, what are my risks or problems? In other words, what are the impediments? So the best answer for this one, my friends, is C. What are my risks or problems? Again, if you go to the Agile Practice Guide, remember, everything is not verbatim in every single Agile publication, but in the Agile Practice Guide, this is the third question on page 53. What are my impediments, in brackets, or risks or problems? You do know that a risk is an impediment waiting to happen. Well, it's also good to capture these at the source in these meetings. Not that you will solve the problems in the meeting, but capturing risks and impediments just makes sense. Let's move on to the next question. You are a PMO manager in your firm. You're working with one of your project managers on a process to ensure that the degree, type, and visibility of risk management are proportionate to both risks and the importance of her project to the organization and other stakeholders. How can you best explain this? Is it A, this is risk planning, B, this is risk implementation. C, this is risk identification. D, this is risk monitoring. What do you think? All right, let's take a look at the answer. So there's a clue here. Ensure that the degree, type, and visibility are proportionate to both risks and the importance of her project to the organization. Visibility of risk management, proportionate. This is a planning thing. It's not implementation. If the degree, type, and visibility of risk management is not up to par with the profile of the stakeholders and the visibility of the project and the importance of the project, there could be trouble. First of all, you'll be doing subpar risk management. And secondly, you may have some stakeholders push back. So it's not a implementation thing. It's not in the very beginning of identification. It's not risk monitoring, it's risk planning. Now, you do know that identification fits under planning. So when you look at these, try to choose the best answer. Plan risk management is the process of defining how to conduct risk management activities for a project. The key benefit of this process is that it ensures that the degree, type, and visibility of risk management are proportionate to both risks and the importance of the project to the organization and other stakeholders. Let's move on to the next question. You work for a research company that has just gone through an agile transformation. You are now working on a project with a high degree of change and a lot of uncertainty. What is the best way of managing the associated risks? Is it A, execute the work using an agile approach? Is it B, use an iterative approach to execute the work? Is it C, use a purely predictive approach? Or is it D, carry out the work using a plan-driven approach? All right. Hit the pause button if you need more time. So it says you've just gone through an agile transformation. Common sense immediately should ask, why would you want to go back to using purely predictive? That's suspicious, right? It says the project has a high degree of change and a lot of uncertainty. This is a recipe for agile all day long. It wouldn't make sense to go predictive or plan-driven. It wouldn't make sense to go purely iterative because iterative delivers one time. Iterative is not the same as agile. So that's more like a trap. And remember, when you have on that continuum, or I should say in that Y and X axes, you have requirements uncertainty, and then you have the technical uncertainty. And you have anarchy over here, you have complex over here, and here you have the simple zone. That's the stuff I'm talking about, okay? So I hope that makes sense to you. With that said, let's move on to our next question. Here's your next question. You are working with the product owner and the developers to place certain risk items in the list of things to do. Which of the following best describes this concept? Hit the pause button if you need more time. So this is a pretty straightforward one. There's no such thing as a risk-reward backlog, so we'll cancel that. Product impact backlog is a bogus word, and so is, well, risk breakdown structure is a legitimate one, but that is not where you would place these risk items in the list of things to do. It wouldn't be in an RBS. So the best answer is going to be in your risk adjusted backlog. Remember that we have a product backlog, but when it's risk adjusted, that means the actions, mitigation actions, or whatever risk related actions to be carried out are now in that backlog. So the best answer is B. Let's move on. You are in the process of identifying risks. You are using a technique to determine the basic underlying cause of a variance, defect, or risk. A root cause may underlie more than one variance, defect, or risk. Which method does this best describe? Is it A, cause and effect diagram? Is it B, brainstorming? Is it C, root cause analysis? Or is it D, Ishikawa analysis? I'll let you think about it. So let's move on to the process of elimination. Ishikawa analysis, it's not typically the term you would use for an Ishikawa diagram, but assume it was. An alarm bell should go off in that A, cause and effect diagram, and D, Ishikawa diagram pretty much mean the same thing. So if you want to say Ishikawa, cause and effect, you're saying the same thing. That's a red light. It's not those because there's a more precise one. And while brainstorming is good, the best answer in this case is C. It's a root cause analysis, and you can read this directly in PMBOK 6, page 415. And it says root cause analysis is typically used to discover the underlying causes that lead to a problem and develop preventive action. It can be used to identify threats by starting with a problem statement and exploring which threats might result in that problem occurring. The same technique can be used to find opportunities by starting with a benefit statement, for example, early delivery or under budget, and exploring which opportunities might result in that benefit being realized. All right, let's move on to the next question. Next question here. Descriptive terms such as very high, high, medium, low, and very low, or numeric values can be used for probability and impact when creating a probability times impact matrix. Which term best describes this numeric value? I'll give you some time. All right, you hit the pause button if you need more time. The best answer here, my friends, when you're carrying out a probability and impact assessment, what would follow is not risk quantity. There's no such term in the guide. It's not a risk number. And EMV is more for quantitative. So it's not D either. The best answer is the risk score. And the risk score is calculated with probability times impact. So the best answer is A, risk score. It reads in the PMBOK Guide, 6th edition, risks are scored in the perform qualitative risk analysis process. The risk register is updated with new information generated during the perform qualitative risk analysis process. Updates to the risk register may include assessments of probability and impacts for each individual project risk, its priority level or risk score, the nominated risk owner, risk urgency information, or risk categorization, and a watch list for low priority risks or risks requiring further analysis. All right, well, there you have it. Let's move on to the next one. Your project has a 70% probability of $10 million profit and a 30% chance of $5 million loss. What is the EMV for the project? Now, I do want to make it clear these questions may not be like this on the exam, especially where multiplication or addition or mathematical functions are concerned, but this is still a good assessment of understanding. So go for it. All right. So expected monetary value is probability times impact. You need to do this for both the chance of loss and the chance of profit. You're going to have 0.7 times 10 million, and that gives you 7 million. And then you're going to have 0.3 times minus 5 million because we're dealing with a loss. and that will be minus 1.5 million. You add them together, it becomes 7 minus 1.5. And from there, you derive the answer. Now, I'm curious, did you get the answer that I'm showing on the screen? The answer is 5.5 million when you do the addition of both variables. So the answer should be A. All right, let's move on, my friends. You are in the process of determining which individual project risk or other sources of uncertainty have the most potential impact on project outcomes. Which method does this describe? I'll give you a few moments. All right, let's use the process of elimination. So it says the method for determining the risks that have the most potential impact. It's not risk forecasts. And while simulation, in a sense, is not a wrong answer, it's not the best answer because we have to be precise about the tools and techniques that are best. It's also not decision tree analysis, even though one could argue that that could give some insights. But the very best answer is sensitivity analysis. Remember, we talk about the tornado diagram and how that is an example of sensitivity analysis. The length of the bars show you which risks are most sensitive. In other words, which of these risks could greatly affect the project most? So the answer is A. This analytical technique, sensitivity analysis, is used to determine which individual project risks or sources of uncertainty have the most potential impact on the project's outcome by correlating variations in project outcomes with variations in elements of a quantitative risk analysis model is the word. All right, let's go ahead and let's move on to the next one. Here's the next question. Oh, and I foolishly showed it, so I apologize. I'm going to act like you didn't see it. Maybe you didn't, maybe you did. The product owner removed 5 stories from the product backlog after meeting with the stakeholders. Which risk response strategy is this? Is it mitigate, accept, avoid, or transfer? All right, so you should understand the responses in the PMBOK guide. You've got A team, accept, transfer, escalate, avoid, and mitigate, or avoid, transfer, escalate, accept, mitigate, right? So which of these is it? When you cut off a chunk of the project, when you take out the scope, you have just done an avoidance. You've not mitigated because there's nothing left. You've cut it off. You've cut off the problem. What could be the problem? Okay. So the best answer here, my friends, is avoid. The avoid strategy. Whenever you cut off some of the scope, just remember that is an avoidance strategy. All right, let's go back and move on. You have encountered a huge risk on your project. The PMO has given you a few options. You decide to remove some of the identified work from the project scope. Which risk response does this describe? Okay. 3, 2, and 1. If you need more time, hit the pause button. So if you've removed some scope, similar to what we just discussed, the best answer is C. It's avoid. It's the same approach, whether you're in the world of agile, hybrid, or predictive. Here's your next one. You have a discussion with your boss that you may need to request additional budget if a particular risk occurs. He tells you there are no funds available to meet your request. Which risk response strategy is this? All right, let's go ahead and check out the options. So, asking for additional budget if a risk occurs. You see, that's the key word. If this happens, I'll need to ask you for this. I may need to ask you for more money if this risk happens because it's reactive, it's not proactive. So it's not mitigate and it's not transfer. So it boils down to two. It's one of the accepts. Is it active accept or is it passive accept? It's got to be one of them. Which one did you choose? If you chose passive accept, you are correct because there are no funds available. Active accept would have been putting funds aside. Okay, so passive accept is the best answer. Acceptance can be either active or passive. The most common active accept strategy is to establish a contingency reserve, including amounts of time, money, or resources to handle the threat if it occurs. At this point, though, nothing is being done. Here's your next question. The product owner has decided to conduct one or more rounds of backlog preparation in order to deal with the ambiguity that surrounds some of the requirements on the project. Which risk response strategy is this? All right. Hit the pause button for more time. Okay, so in this case, you are doing something proactively to deal with the risk. You're not transferring, you're not avoiding, and you're not merely saying, well, whatever happens, happens, let's just go ahead as planned. No, you're actually doing something because you want to reduce the probability of things going wrong. So in this case, you are mitigating. You are mitigating, and the best answer is A. That's a reduction of the probability of whatever it is happening. Okay. And here, do remember though, that in the 7th edition, you have a couple of numbering schemes. So I'm going to go ahead and make sure that the 2.8 reference does hold because we have various page nomenclatures for the 7th edition, if you get what I'm saying. So this is 2851, and it looks like it's in the wheelhouse of risk. And 2.5.1 is on page 123 thereabouts. And we have indeed the A team, avoid, escalate, transfer, mitigate, accept, talked about there. All right, let's move on. Moving on. In your project, some equipment is to be shipped from another country by sea. The sea route is likely to encounter a storm during the shipment period, which could cause a delay of about 10 days. You identify that not having the equipment on site as scheduled could delay your project by about 2 months. It is therefore necessary to plan an alternate solution. You arrange with a local company that has the same equipment to lease it, pending the time your own equipment reaches your site in case of shipment delays. This is an example of which risk management process? Is it developing a risk management plan? Is it implementing a risk response plan? Is it monitoring project risks? Is it computing the expected monetary value? What do you think? I'll give you some time. All right. So let's take a look at the language. You arrange. You're not thinking of doing it, you are doing it. You arrange with a local company to do all these things. So it's not computing EMV and it's not monitoring project risk. You are carrying out something, arranging, right? It's not developing a risk management plan. This is really more like a risk response plan. It's like carrying out a plan. See, you arrange with a local company. You have the equipment. We want to make sure we got your equipment to back us up. You're implementing a risk response plan. What you're doing is you are trying your best to stem the tide, the impact, if that risk happens. So, in essence, you are implementing a risk response plan, some sort of mitigation measure. Can't totally avoid it, but you could mitigate it. All right, so your plan B is an alternate solution. Let's move on. So it says you have implemented a risk response to deal with an identified risk, B. All right, next one. You have assigned some risk response actions to risk owners outside the immediate project team. Many of these risk owners have other competing demands. Which approach will you use to ensure responses are implemented? All right, let's use process of elimination again. You want to make sure that the responses were implemented. Coercion or punishment is never the best option. You can't say, I'm going to ensure that you do this by punishing people if they don't. No, that's not the route we take. A mere stakeholder matrix is not really clear. Maybe it's a stakeholder engagement assessment matrix, but again, that in and of itself is not enough, right, to ensure responses are implemented. Doesn't make sense to choose that. So it wouldn't be stakeholder matrix. We've got two options. We have risk audits and we have influencing. Think about risk audits. They are after the fact, right? It's not ensuring that the response is implemented. A risk audit checks the effectiveness of your risk strategy or your risk approach in general. But when it comes to influencing, that is leadership. And that is a valid way for you to ensure that indeed the stakeholders or the team members or whoever did carry out what needed to be done. So the best answer is D, my friends. So there you have it, my friends. The best answer is D. It's influencing. You can find this on page 451 of PMBOK 6. It says interpersonal and team skills that can be used for this process include, but are not limited to, influencing. All right, let's move on. Your team has overcome a huge risk, and you need to ensure that this risk is gone once and for all. You decide to conduct a risk assessment as part of what? What should your risk reassessment be part of? Think about it. All right. So the options that you have here, you've got retrospective, risk review meeting, risk planning meeting, risk execution meeting. So a risk reassessment reassesses your risk performance, which means you're actually carrying out the risk management plan at this point. You are executing stuff, right? So it's no longer in the planning aspect. So it's not C, it's not planning. It's not a retrospective because that will be after some rounds of execution, right? This needs to be done as proactively as possible. So you've got B and D. Would you say this is done in risk execution meeting? Well, there's actually no such meeting. There's risk planning meetings, a risk execution meeting. It's actually not really a thing. The best answer, according to the PMBOK Guide 6th edition, based on the actual language, the lingo that we use, is risk review meeting. So risk responses are carried out quite all right, but then we have a point in time where we ask, was this the best response? Was this a worthwhile approach to our risks? Was this good or not? So the best answer to this, my friends, is option B. It's a risk review meeting. And you can find this in the PMBOK Guide, 6th edition, under the tools and techniques there. We do have risk review meetings talked about on page 457 of PMBOK 6. And it says meetings that can be used during this process include, but are not limited to, risk reviews. Risk reviews are scheduled regularly and should examine and document the effectiveness of risk responses in dealing with overall project risks and identify individual project risks. Risk reviews may also result in identification of new individual project risks, including secondary risks that arise from agreed upon risk responses, risk reassessment of current risks, the closing of risks that are outdated, issues that have arisen as a result of risks that have occurred, and identification of lessons to be learned for implementation in ongoing phases in the project or in similar projects in the future. So a bit of a mouthful, but go on and check out page 457 in the PMBOK Guide, 6th edition. All right, here's our next question, and it reads, you are in the middle of an analysis to compare technical accomplishments during project execution to the schedule of technical achievement. You realize a possible risk associated with a scheduled task. So you build in a contingency into the schedule and monitor contractor performance. Which response does this best describe? I'll let you think about it for a bit. Is it avoid, transfer, accept, or mitigate? Think about it. All right. So there's a trick to this, my friends. Anytime you see contingency as part of a risk measure, you need to understand that contingencies are always associated with after the fact action. So the best answer to this is accept. When you accept a risk, you could at the same time say, well, if this risk happens, let's build in a contingency. Or you could say, let's build in a contingency to cushion whatever happens, but you're not doing anything proactive. You are accepting. The only thing you're doing is putting money aside. So we could say that is a little bit more of an active accept, but in reality, it does not equate to a mitigate action, if that makes sense. When you're using a contingency, it's as though you're saying, okay, whatever happens, happens. We're just going to accept it, right? When you mitigate, you're doing something proactive to stem the tide, to either reduce the probability or the impact, or if you take the avoid strategy, you're actually avoiding the risk altogether, right? You're preventing the risk from happening. So this, again, you can find this in the PMBOK Guide 7th edition this time, and it's under 2.8.5.1, that whole narrative about accept. And it says, actively accepting a risk can include developing a contingency plan that would be triggered if the event occurred. So this is more of the accept clause than anything else. All right. With that said, my friends, we are going into our next zone where we take a look at some additional situational questions of a more exam stringent level. The language is always different in these, and this one reads, as a project manager in the construction industry, you are leading a project to build a new commercial complex. During the execution phase, you identify a potential risk related to adverse weather conditions that could impact the project. What should you do next to manage this risk effectively? I'll give you some time to think about it. All right, well, let's take a look at the options here. You have A, assess the probability and impact of the adverse weather conditions on the project. You have B, develop a contingency plan to mitigate cost overruns caused by adverse weather conditions. You have C, communicate the risk to the project stakeholders and seek their input on addressing it. And you have D, update the project management plan to include additional resources to expedite construction activities in case of weather-related delays. Now, taking a look at these, there are some that are great, but they shouldn't necessarily come first. What are the steps in risk management? Identify the risk. You could look into identifying the root cause and the effect. But after you identify risk, the next thing is to do qualitative risk analysis and then quantitative risk analysis. So here, the question is just saying you've identified a risk. This is pretty much just, hey, this could happen, right? You've identified a potential risk. You haven't done anything else. You've not done a qualitative risk analysis. And the qualitative risk analysis is assessing the probability and impact. Developing a contingency plan will be planned risk responses. Too early to do that. Communicating the risk to stakeholders and seeking their input is like, mother may I. Why do you need to do that when you're capable, right? That would not be the best option in this case. And then update the project management plan is something that would follow after approval, after agreement, but it's not what you would do first. And it says to include additional resources to expedite construction activities in case of weather-related delays. That is presumptuous. Okay, so the best answer in this example, in this question, my friends, is A. I know B looks very appealing, but you wouldn't jump into a contingency plan without really understanding what if the probability and the impact are very minuscule, because the question just says you identified a potential risk, right? It didn't say if it's a big risk or big probability or big impact. So the best answer is A. A little bit on the slimy, tricky side, I know, but you got to get used to seeing some of these. That definitely will trick some folks up. All right, let's go to our next one. Number 24. You are a project manager in the biotechnical industry, overseeing a research project to develop a new medical treatment. During the execution phase, you identify an overall project risk associated with regulatory approval delays, which could impact the project's outcome and viability. What should you do next to manage this risk? I'll let you think about it for a bit. All right, let's go ahead and analyze this question. So think about it. Project manager, during execution, you identify an overall project risk. An overall project risk is one that can bring the project to its knees, kill the project, could be very bad. And it says, what should you do next? Well, if you identify something that could kill the project, you're going to want to take action ASAP, that's for sure. Analyzing the potential consequences of regulatory approval delays. You already know this is an overall project risk, so it can kill the entire project. That's what. See, that's what it could do. So analyzing potential consequences, you already know the consequences because it's told you it's an overall project risk. These are very, very important big risks that could kill an entire project. So A has already been done for you and it been labeled as an overall project risk. Okay. Let's go to D. Update the project management plan to reflect the potential timeline extension. You wouldn't update potential extensions. You need to ensure that whatever you're doing is indeed approved, right? So it's not that. So we'll cancel D. And that leaves you with B and C. As usual, boils down to 2. B, collaborate with the regulatory authorities to expedite the approval process. Minimize potential delays. Let's think about this very carefully. You're talking about a regulatory situation. Imagine looking for regulatory approval from the likes of the FDA or some other body like OSHA. Can you expedite their approval process? Think about it. Is that realistic? This says minimize potential delays. Think about it. In all reality, is that the best option? Definitely, collaborating with regulatory authorities is important, but to expedite the approval process? Really? Think about this. Let's go back to the question. It says, during the execution phase, you identify an overall project risk associated with regulatory approval delays, which could impact the project's outcome and viability. So this is important. But when it comes to regulatory delays, expediting the approval process and minimizing potential delays is out of your control. You cannot bank on that. That would not be the catch-all answer. And honestly, if you're not in the right sense or the right frame of mind, it could be hard for you to deal with this question. I'll just be straight up honest. You have to be really laser focused that A and B are not the best options. Neither is D. And that leaves us with 1, C. Develop a risk response plan. Good. To do what? To address the regulatory approval delays, whatever that might look like. But we cannot prescribe that it's going to be this. We may not even have inroads to those regulatory authorities, which is why B is not the best. It's presumptuous, right? But if we look at C, let's take all the markings away. Develop a risk response plan to address the regulatory approval delays, whatever that might look like. We don't know right now, and ensure project continuity. It will lead to a win. But in B, how do we know we have those inroads? And how do we know that will lead to a win? It's a bit out of our control. Like I said, A has already been done for you pretty much. And D is early. So the best answer here, my friends, is none other than develop a risk response plan. The explanation here says this is an overall project risk. By developing a risk response plan to address the regulatory approval delays and ensure project continuity, the project manager can proactively manage the risk, implementing appropriate strategies to mitigate the impact on the project timeline and maintain progress. Option B, collaborating with regulatory authorities could be a valuable strategy, but it might not always be entirely within your control, and it might not eliminate all delays. Therefore, it should be part of your risk response plan rather than the immediate next step, given that the consequence of regulatory approval is already known to be the potential impact on the project's outcome and viability. Most appropriate next step would indeed be to develop a risk response plan. All right, these questions, like I said, are a cut above. They make you think, and they are definitely a whole lot more difficult. They up the ante, but it puts you in that exam state of mind. Question 25. As a project manager in the financial and banking industry, you are leading a project. I'm going to let you read it just so that you get into the character of the exam, and I'm going to let you spend some time thinking of how to answer it. I'll give you some time differently this time. All right, so let's examine the question. I'll point out a few things by using the highlighter. As a project manager in the financial and banking industry, you are leading a project to implement a new digital banking platform. During execution, you identify risk related to cybersecurity breaches that could compromise customer data security. Oh dear, this could be really bad if it does happen. What should you do next to manage this risk effectively? Keyword, effectively, and next. So if you find that customer data could be compromised, not that it is being compromised, but it could happen, you need to be proactive and take proactive action, not reactive action. Developing a contingency plan is reactive action. We already know that developing a contingency is like accepting. So it's not C. If you chose C, it's not right. C says develop a contingency plan to minimize the impact of a cybersecurity breach on customer data. That doesn't make sense. Contingency plan means it's happened. Let's minimize the impact of this breach. Why would you choose that? You're signing up to allow it happen? No. Let's take a look at the other option D. Update the project management plan to include regular security audits and vulnerability assessments. It's not a bad thing to do, but that is not your major step now. Right now, you need to do something to stem the tide to prevent this from actually happening. It's still a risk. So what are you going to do to be proactive about it? Let's take a look at A. Conduct a detailed comprehensive risk assessment to identify potential vulnerabilities and security measures. So think about it. We're going to conduct a big old risk assessment. We're going to find probability times impact to identify potential vulnerabilities. So we find all of these 1, 2, 3, 4 vulnerabilities. And then we go a step further to say probability times impact, because you just said a risk assessment, right? So would you do that? Would you carry out a big old risk assessment when you have this going on? Think about it. Would that be the first thing you do? Would that be the best thing to do? What other option do you have? Well, B says collaborate with cybersecurity experts to implement. You're going to implement this ASAP, robust security controls, and preventive. You're going to prevent this from happening. That's what you need to do, because this is a cybersecurity risk. You need to prevent it from happening. You need to be aggressive, right? So D is presumptuous, C is reactive. A, conduct a detailed, comprehensive risk assessment. Detailed? assessment and don't do anything about the exposure is not the best option. What you do want to do is collaborate with cybersecurity experts. They can do all the assessment stuff that they need to as part of implementing robust security controls and preventive measures. You want to go with that. That is the best option for this question, my friends. Okay. So the best answer I would have imagined is B. The rationale: by collaborating with cybersecurity experts to implement robust security controls and preventive measures, the project manager can proactively manage the risk of cybersecurity breaches, safeguard customer data, and ensure successful implementation of the digital banking platform. You need prevention. That's the most important thing. All right. Well, I hope this has been making sense. It's a very long session, but risk is a beast, and we very much needed to do this. Let's take a look at our final question, the spinner. It reads, an experienced project manager on a hybrid project resigns, and a new project manager joins the team. During the initial assessment of project documentation, the new project manager discovers that the impediment log has not been updated for the past month. What should the project manager do first? All right. Well, let's round this up. So we have, do you consult with the team to understand the current state of impediments? Do you examine the issue log for risks and issues, not on the impediment log? Do you escalate the matter to the product owner since they own this backlog? Or do you check in with the business analyst, as this is usually their job? Let's use the process of elimination. First of all, this is not the job of the business analyst. That is not true, right? The whole idea about the impediment log being the job of the business analyst is wrong. C says escalate the matter to the product owner since they own the backlog. Again, it's not true. When it comes to the impediment log that we have in this question, it's not the same as a product backlog. So you see how they're trying to put words into your head. You will have questions on the exam that do that. So you need to know your content very well to delineate fact from fiction. C is fiction, right? They don't own the impediment log. They own or are accountable for the backlog, product backlog, but they don't own the impediment log. Let's take a look at B. Examine the issue log for risks and issues, not on the impediment log. You don't examine an issue log for risk. They're different. The risks are in the risk register. The issues are in the issue log. So B is not correct. The best answer is A. The best answer is consult the team to understand the current state of impediments, option A. Okay, and that is how you should address questions when you encounter them on your test. You should always, first of all, assess by using the DIGCIV approach. DIGCIV, define the problem, identify the root cause, generate alternatives. You've heard me say that before, right? The whole DIGCIV thing. Let's clear this and do it. Define the problem, identify the root cause, generate alternatives. Then you choose the best alternative. And then you go through it mentally and make sure that it's indeed the best, right? We have implement and verify, but you got to do this mentally on the exam. But practically, what is the problem of this in this question? Identify the root cause, generate alternatives, and then choose the best alternative. Okay? So my friends, I know lots of you getting ready for this test. I know you're working hard. I applaud you on working hard, but I want to challenge you even more to daily hit this content. Go hard at the content. If you need help, you need assistance in any way, go on down to the Praizion.com website. We'll be very happy to help, to give you any clarity. And if you need courses that can help and prepare you for the exam, check out our courses on Praizion.com. Thank you very much. I wish you all the very best. You take care and bye for now. And don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and share this with your friends. Appreciate you hitting the bell icon as well. Like, subscribe, share. See you in the next video. You know, this is a series of 10. We only have 2 left, so make sure you look for all the